أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وبعد قال الإمام الحسين عليه السلام إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي. In our previous lecture, we mentioned that our purpose for this lecture is the relevance of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in the 21st century. When we take a look at Imam Hussein's life and we talk about his relevance in the 21st century, another question that pops up is, why would a person step out even when they know that they face certain death? Is that not kind of suicidal? And if it is suicidal, will it then be righteous? The answer to this question comes within history. The answer to this question comes to us in different forms throughout history. We realize that throughout history, when we take a look at history, we find out that many were they who stood up on principle and died standing on their feet. Many were they who were willing to sacrifice their lives for principles, for ideas, for ideologies that they believed were worth dying for. In fact, it is mentioned clearly and very famously, a statement from one of the great leaders, that anyone who is not willing to die for something does not deserve to live in the first place. This particular kind of statement is not for everyone. It is rather for a few people, for those who are willing to stand up for principles. And that is why when they stand up, we see them as heroes, because their courage is something that we could not replicate. We take ourselves back into ancient Greece. We take ourselves back to the year 470, when a man was born, to the year 399, when the person finally died. The year 399 before Christ, in Greece, saw a man sitting in a room with many students around him. This man was facing certain death. He was not worried. He was not saddened. He was not at all in melancholy. You could not see gloom on his face. This man was completely at peace. A look on his face saw a man that was completely at peace with what he was about to face. His students, all the people around him, worried, giving out solutions, suggesting ways by which he could escape. The man sat there, totally unfazed by what was before him. Some of his students who were rich and connected suggested, we could smuggle you out. We could give you an escape route. The man refused. He said, I will not run away. I will not seek to escape. I will not seek to save my own life. I will rather die standing on my feet. I will rather die standing for the principles that I believe are true, rather than to escape. For if I escape, then I would have betrayed the long years of service that I had given to this particular truth, to this particular cause. My cause has always been to teach the people what is right, to open their eyes to reality, and to ensure that they forgo superstitions. If I run away today, then I truly never really believed in what I was teaching them. A few hours later, the man took a sip of hemlock, a very deadly poison that killed with extreme pain. Nonetheless, he took it, died while there was no sign of sadness on his face, in spite of the pain. This man was Socrates. He died because he had opposed the Greek gods and had established that the youth of Greece should stand up for what is logical. He had posited that these gods were fake gods, that these gods were not real, that they were superstitions. He had posited that the politicians were making use of these gods to exploit the people. He had posited that there were lots of fallacies through which the politicians were ruling the people. Socrates had wanted to liberate the people from the shackles of corruption that had taken over the country through the politicians of the time. The politicians, realizing that Socrates was becoming a threat to their rule, a threat to their wealth, a threat to their power, a threat to their influence, orchestrated a charge of blasphemy against him. And at the courts, he was sentenced to die by poisoning for blaspheming against their gods. Socrates could have fled because a lot of students were influential, connected, and rich. However, he decided to stand there and to die for what he believed was right. His death served as a point of reminder to those who were still alive that indeed what he was teaching was worth something. If he was willing to die for what he was teaching, then we should be willing to hold on to it more aggressively. Out of Socrates, one may ask, are there any other people who gave up their lives for the sake of principles that they stood upon? And we will find that one of Arc, a French lady, a young lady, had also given up her life in England when she was captured and charged with dressing like a man and with blasphemy. She was offered a way out if only she would recant what she was saying. She believed she had visions that were true. She rejected the offer to recant, to confess, and to live. She chose to die standing on principle. She was 21 years old at the time. We find that Sir Thomas More of England, who was a servant of the crown at the time, also chose to die, even when he was given an opportunity, simply to recognize the sovereignty of the king over the church. And he rejected it. He rejected it on the principle that the king was not the sovereign of the church. It was rather the priests who were sovereigns of the church. When he was sentenced to die, and on the day when he was to be hanged, he proclaimed that he was a servant of the king, a true servant of the king, but a servant of God first. Sir Thomas More died not recognizing the sovereignty of the king over the church. These are people who stood up for what was right, on principle, agreeing, accepting, welcoming death in order to serve what they believed was the truth. If one therefore asks, why did Imam Hussein leave? Why did he stand up, knowing very well that it was dangerous and could lead to his death? One is reminded that when Imam al-Hussein left, he left on principle. He left on principle to bring about reform to the Ummah of his father. And this principle was something worth dying. This principle was what he stood upon, with no hypocrisy, to the end of his life. If there was another way by which the reform could be achieved without dying, certainly he would have chosen that particular path, to bring about reform without sacrificing his life. However, it was the case that the reform could only be achieved through pain of death. Imam al-Hussein did not go out as a suicidal person. He did not set out to die. He set out to bring about reform. And that reform was only achieved through his death. Why? Because like the politicians of Greece who saw that the reform of Socrates would bring about the end of their rule, the end of their power, the end of their wealth and influence, the politician of the time also saw that if the reform Imam al-Hussein is seeking were to be established, then their power, their influence, their wealth will be threatened. And so Imam Hussein did not set out to die. Rather, he set out to bring about reform. And it was those who were against reform who had set out to kill him. And they succeeded in killing him, but failed in preventing the reform that he sought. The question we need to ask now is, looking at the relevance of Imam Hussein today, are those reforms he sought to bring about, have they been achieved? Have those reforms come to fruition or not? If they had come to fruition, are they still today in our midst taking charge, or have we lost that reform? And if we have lost that reform, what are the means and ways by which we can, or we could regain this particular reforms that Imam Hussein had set out for? We shall discuss that in our third part. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.